Now we want to talk about comparative advantage and exchange. When looking at markets and looking at countries and looking at people and how and why different groups trade goods and services with each other, it's very important to understand comparative advantage. And the key to understanding comparative advantage is looking at opportunity costs. Of opportunity cost. It's one of the most important things you can learn about in an economics class. The opportunity cost of something is what you sacrifice to get something. That's the definition of opportunity cost. When you think about that, anytime you do something in an environment where there's scarcity, you have to make choices. In fact, you're probably going to have several alternatives for any decision that you make. The opportunity cost of something is the value of what you give up. In other words, the value of the next best alternative when looking at a decision you've made. Here's some examples. A classic example is the cost of college. When you go to college, you pay tuition, you pay fees, you pay room and board. You also give up income that you could have earned if you were working. For example, suppose you could have earned $20,000 a year if you were not in college. Well, part of the cost of going to college is what you've given up, or the opportunity cost of your college time. So on top of tuition and books of $40,000 here in this example, you also want to add in $80,000. So the total economic cost, which includes your opportunity cost of what you've given up to go to college, should include that lost income. Now, how do we use this principle of opportunity cost when we're looking at choices we might want to be making? Well, here's a classic example that we're going to want to look at. This is a graph that's called the production possibilities curve. Now we want to know what this curve means, remember. The definition of the production possibilities curve is how much you can produce of two different goods if you use all of your resources efficiently. So in this example, we're going to assume that in this economy you can produce steel or wheat, or some combination of steel and wheat. This dark green line is the production possibilities curve. Along this line, we're assuming that you're using all resources that can be used to produce steel and wheat, and you're using them efficiently. Now, when we look at that, what does that mean? Well, it means that we could produce at point A using quite a bit of resources to produce steel and very little to produce wheat, or we could produce at point D. At this point, again, we're using all of our resources, but we've decided to use more of them for wheat than we were at point A. Either place is efficient because we're using all of our resources efficiently. Another thing we might want to ask is, could we produce at point E? And the answer is yes. We can produce at point E. It just means that we're not using all of our resources efficiently, because if we were, we would be somewhere on the production possibilities frontier. Another question you might ask is, can you produce out here, outside of the production possibilities curve? And the answer is no. Right? You can't get outside the production possibilities curve, because if you were, then you would be using more than the resources that you have, and that's not possible. So, how does this relate to the principle of opportunity cost? Well, suppose you choose to produce at point A with 700 tons of steel and 10 tons of wheat. If you decide to move from point A to point B, you have to use more resources for wheat than you were using. You get 10 more tons of wheat. But what does it cost you to get those 10 tons of wheat? The next best alternative is what else you would be producing, which is steel. So the opportunity cost of that additional 10 tons of wheat is the 50 tons of steel that you had to give up. Because from moving from point A to point B, we now have less steel. We've gone from 700 down to 650 to get that additional 10 tons of wheat. So the opportunity cost of producing the additional wheat is how much steel you had to give up. Anytime we move down along the production possibilities curve, we're making a choice between the production of one good and the production of the other good. So the opportunity cost is represented by what is given up to get the additional amount